Wake of the Bellerophon by T.B. Dahl. Chapter 14. Nelson's Squadron. Over the next year, Thomas Oxenham learned that glory, once printed in newspapers, left most of the work behind. The glorious 1st of June became speeches, medals, toasts, engravings, patriotic songs, inaccurate tavern arguments, and a number of very poor poems. HMS Bellerophon became again what she had always been, a ship in commission, expected to be ready in all weather, in all moods, and at all hours when the Admiralty discovered a use for her. The work was blockade. There was no romance in the word. Blockade meant watching, waiting, sailing back and forth along assigned stations off Brest and Lorient until the French coast became both enemy and furniture. It meant keeping the enemy in harbour, catching anything that tried to slip out, escorting anything valuable that needed passing through dangerous waters, and enduring the sea's conviction that British strategy could be improved by rain. Day after day, Bellerophon worked her patrol line. The French ports lay behind weather, haze, distance, and suspicion. Some mornings they were visible as low smudges on the horizon. Some days they disappeared entirely, though everyone aboard behaved as if the French might leap from the fog in formation, because the Navy rewarded pessimism that looked like vigilance. One dreary November morning, rain lashed the quarterdeck so hard it bounced from the planks. Thomas stood beside Lieutenant Ballard, oilskins dripping, spyglass lifted to a distant sail that came and went through grey weather. "The weather is our true enemy now," Ballard said. Rain ran from the brim of his hat. "More ships are lost to storms than enemy action." Thomas wiped water from the glass. "French or Spanish, sir?" Ballard took the telescope and studied the sail. "Dutch, I think. Bound for Amsterdam, likely with wine, cheese, and a captain who will insist he has seen no Frenchman since infancy." Thomas almost smiled. The blockade was tedious. Tedium at sea was not rest. It was work without drama. It was wet bedding, short sleep, salt meat growing worse by degrees, biscuit that developed tenants, watches in freezing spray, sails reefed in darkness, lines chafing through, men quarrelling because nothing had happened, and officers praying nothing would happen, while also longing for something to happen so the waiting might justify itself. Thomas found, to his own surprise, that he did not hate it. Not entirely. Blockade refined him. A fleet action taught fear quickly. Blockade taught patience slowly, which was the harder education. He improved at noon sights, at dead reckoning, at judging cloud and swell, at reading sail, at knowing when a man needed correction, and when a man needed food, dry socks, or silence. He learned that command was less often heroic decision than accurate attention repeated until everyone else grew bored. Captain Cranstone demanded much and noticed everything. He did not treat midshipmen as decorative messengers, which some boys resented until they met captains who did and discovered the insult of being ornamental. Cranstone insisted that his young gentlemen understand sail handling, gunnery mathematics, watch discipline, stores, signals, and navigation in weather that made neat calculation feel personally mocked. During one inspection, with sleet striking the deck, he said, "A midshipman who cannot take a noon sight in a gale is useless to me." A pause. "Since noon and gales rarely arrange themselves for your convenience, learn both separately and then be unsurprised when Providence combines them." He turned to Thomas. "And one who cannot manage both men and mathematics will never make lieutenant." "Yes, sir." "Do not say yes, as if it has accomplished the thing." "No, sir." "That answer has accomplished even less." Cranstone moved on. By spring, blockade gave way to convoy duty. Bellerophon joined a squadron escorting more than 100 merchant vessels from Portsmouth toward Gibraltar, and Thomas discovered that shepherding merchantmen was a task designed to test Christian charity in men who had not been issued enough. The convoy stretched for miles. Ships of every size, rig, condition and temperament wallowed across the sea. Brigs, snows, barks, transports, storeships, coasters, dull sailing tubs, nimble little traders, and one vessel whose captain appeared to believe that convoy formation was a suggestion made by men with poor imagination. French privateers lurked near the Spanish coast. The merchant captains knew this. They still straggled. Thomas found himself commanding a 6-oared cutter, sent repeatedly to herd wandering vessels back into line. He came back soaked, hoarse, irritated, and better informed about the stubbornness of civilian seamanship. One afternoon, spray flying cold over the cutter's bow, he stood in the stern sheets and hailed a portly merchant captain whose vessel had sagged far astern. "Damn your eyes, sir! Do you wish to be taken by the French?" The merchant captain, red-faced, heavy-jowled, and equipped with magnificent mutton-chop whiskers, bellowed back, "My ship sails like a pregnant cow. What would you have me do?" Thomas had no training for pregnant cows in convoy procedure. He improvised. "Reduce sail and hold your position until nightfall. We shall send a frigate to tow you if necessary. If you continue to drift, I shall report you as volunteering for a French prize court." The merchant captain stared. Then he turned and gave orders. The ship slowly obeyed, grumbling through blocks and canvas. Thomas sat back down in the cutter and discovered that diplomacy sometimes worked best when dressed as impatient. That night, a French privateer came down on the convoy's rear like a knife in dark cloth. She took 2 merchantmen before the escorts could close. Bellerophon gave chase, but the privateer vanished into night and weather, leaving behind only anger, lost cargo, and the knowledge that vigilance had limits. Captain Cranstoun was furious. He did not shout. This was worse. A captain's quiet disappointment could travel through a ship faster than a boatswain's pipe. In the berth, Farley sat with Thomas over their logs. "This is the real war," Farley said. "Not the grand fleet actions the papers adore. Just endless watching and occasional failure." Thomas wrote the loss of the 2 merchantmen in careful ink. "My father says patience is a naval officer's greatest virtue. Your father has not tried to shepherd a merchant brig with a captain shaped like pudding. He may have. Then he is a saint." By early summer of 1798, rumours swept the fleet with unusual force. Bonaparte was gathering something at Toulon, an invasion force, a great expedition. No one knew its destination, so everyone named one. Ireland, Portugal, Naples, Sicily, Egypt, India. The moon, according to Clark, if the French could persuade a balloon to carry artillery. Orders came. Bellerophon was to join a squadron under Rear Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson in the Mediterranean. By then Captain Darby had the ship, and Bellerophon had settled into another rhythm of command, stricter than Hope's, different from Cranstoun's, but efficient enough to satisfy even the oldest hands. The name passed through the ship like a fresh wind. Nelson, one-armed, one eye ruined, bold, impatient, a commander who had made aggression seem almost mathematical. Men who had never seen him spoke of him as if he had personally lent them money. Officers discussed his tactics. Midshipmen repeated stories of Cape St. Vincent until details multiplied beyond biology. Even old hands, suspicious by trade, admitted that Nelson had a way of finding the enemy, and then behaving as though heaven had placed them there for his convenience. In the berth, the news caused uproar. "Nelson himself," Morris said. Clark said, "Then we shall either win glory or be killed before dinner." Milford looked over a chart. Possibly both. Thomas felt the old pull. Not childish hunger for battle now. Something more complex. Nelson's name suggested movement, decision. Hazard accepted with eyes open. It suggested that the endless watching might at last become action. Bellerophon joined Nelson's squadron off Toulon in May. The French had already gone. This was inconvenient and very French of them. What followed was a chase across the Mediterranean that tested every rope, temper, chart, water cask, and rumour available to the squadron. Nelson drove his ships hard. Sicily, Egypt, back towards Sicily. Reports contradicted one another with enthusiasm. Bonaparte's fleet seemed always recently present and currently absent. Where have they gone became a shipboard litany. Men asked it over charts, over meals, at the rail, in the berth, during sail changes, once during cutlass drill, which was not helpful. "It is like chasing a ghost," Thomas said to Milford as they pored over charts in the berth. Milford marked a possible course with his pencil. "Ghosts do not transport armies. This one does. Nelson will find them." Thomas looked at him. Milford, once the great patron of disdain, now spoke with clean conviction. "He always does," Milford added. In early July, while the squadron reprovisioned at Syracuse, orders came down that temporarily unsettled the internal arrangement of several ships. Officers were ill. Gaps had opened. Midshipmen were to be redistributed for cross-training and necessity. Necessity being the Navy's polite name for disarray with paperwork. Thomas was supervising the loading of water casks when Lieutenant Morris, Ballard's stricter replacement, and a man who appeared to have been born disappointed, called him sharply, "Oxenham, quarterdeck. Captain wants you." Thomas wiped his hands and went. Captain Cranstone stood with another officer, tall, lean, weathered, with intelligent eyes, and a spare manner that wasted neither movement nor words. "Mr. Oxenham," Cranstone said, "Captain Thomas Foley of HMS Goliath." Thomas saluted. "Sir?" "Goliath's sailing master is ill," Cranstone continued. "They require additional support in navigation. Given your aptitude, I have volunteered your services." Volunteered, Thomas had learned, meant ordered with complement attached. "Yes, sir." Captain Foley studied him. "Captain Cranstone speaks highly of your mathematics. I hope to be useful, sir." "You are James Oxenham's son?" "Yes, sir. HMS. Lively." "I know the name. Good seaman." Foley nodded once. "You report to Goliath at 8 bells. Bring instruments, charts, and whatever personal gear is necessary. We sail as soon as Nelson has finished shaking Sicily for rumours." Thomas returned below with mixed feelings. Bellerophon had become home by force of discomfort. Her smells, noises, birth, dangers, and familiar irritations belonged to him now. To leave, even temporarily, felt like being shifted from one language into another. His messmates gathered as he packed. Farley handed him a small pocket compass. "For luck?" Thomas turned it over. "I have one." "Then you will be twice as lucky. Do not argue with mathematics." Milford leaned against a beam. "Do not grow attached to Goliath. We expect you back once we have thrashed the French." "Will you save any Frenchmen for me?" "No." Clark said, "He will return with improved manners." Morris added, "Impossible." Lieutenant Morris gave him no sentimental farewell, which was consistent and therefore almost comforting. "Do credit to Bellerophon," he said. "I will, sir." The boat delivered Thomas to Goliath at precisely 8 bells. She too was a 74, but not Bellerophon. That was his first impression and his second. Goliath felt tauter, harder polished, more deliberately ordered. Her decks gleamed from recent holy stoning. The running rigging lay with mathematical neatness. Her crew moved crisply with that collective alertness produced by a captain whose expectations have already travelled faster than his orders. The first lieutenant, Mr. Wilkinson, received him with brisk courtesy. "Captain is expecting you." "This way, Mr. Oxenham." Captain Foley's cabin was austere. Charts dominated, instruments lay in practical reach. Books on tactics, navigation, and history stood secured on a shelf. There were fewer personal touches than in Cranstone's cabin, fewer comforts, less softness. Foley seemed a man who believed furniture should justify itself. He sat at his desk studying a chart of the Egyptian coast. "Come in, Mr. Oxenham." Thomas entered. Foley did not look up immediately. "I understand you have a gift for coastal navigation." "I have had some success with it, sir." Foley raised his eyes. "This is not a time for false modesty. Can you navigate unfamiliar waters close to shore with incomplete charts?" Thomas considered before answering. "Yes, sir. With soundings, observation, and sufficient caution, I believe I can." "Caution." Foley tapped the chart. "Useful, provided it does not become cowardice in better clothes." "No, sir. Bonaparte has not vanished. He has taken his fleet somewhere. When we find him, we may have to fight in waters none of us know well. That is where a man who can think in depths, bearings, and consequences becomes valuable." Thomas worked hard aboard Goliath. The sailing master, though recovering, could not yet carry full duties. Thomas found himself working directly with Foley, Wilkinson, and the master's mates. He took soundings, compared coastal reports, updated working charts, studied current, wind, shoals, harbour mouths, and every scrap of local knowledge that came aboard from merchantmen, pilots, fishermen, consular whispers, and men who claimed certainty in exchange for wine. Foley tested him constantly. "Never accept the obvious approach," he said during one chart session. "The obvious approach is often what the enemy has prepared for. The unexpected maneuver, properly executed, may be worth a dozen guns." "Yes, sir." "Improperly executed, it is worth a court-martial and a reef full of dead men." "Yes, sir." "Good. Remember both halves." Aboard Goliath, Thomas held a peculiar prominence. He was not merely one of many midshipmen now. He was the temporary navigation prodigy from Bellerophon, summoned to the great cabin too often for the comfort of his new messmates. "Captain's pet," one muttered after Thomas had been called aft for the third time in a day. Another, a serious young man named Philip, looked up from his book. "Jealousy ill becomes an officer." The first boy scowled. Philip continued, "Oxenham is here because he can do something we need." Thomas liked Philip at once, though liking at sea was best confirmed over several meals and at least one storm. The search dragged on. Nelson drove the squadron from report to report, from hope to irritation and back again. Alexandria, empty. Back west, Sicily. Then east. The Greek waters, rumour, absence, heat, flies. Water rationing, men muttering that Bonaparte had found a private ocean and hidden in it. By late July, Thomas had been aboard Goliath nearly a month. Then, on the evening of July 31st, a summons came. Foley stood in his cabin with senior officers around a chart of the Egyptian coast. "We have word from Nelson," Foley said without preamble. "The French fleet has been sighted off Alexandria. We make for Egypt with all possible speed." No one cheered. Officers rarely cheer when the work has finally found them. The air altered. Foley beckoned Thomas closer. "Mr. Oxenham, Aboukir Bay." Thomas studied the chart. His fatigue vanished by degrees. Shoals, coastline. Bay. French anchorage, if they had chosen it. "Charts show shoals extending from shore, sir. A ship of the line must approach with care." "More. If the French are anchored there, they may use the shoals as protection on the landward side." "Likely. They would expect attack from seaward." Foley watched him. Thomas traced the northern end of the bay with one finger. If their van is not anchored close enough to the shoal, there may be water inside them. "Enough?" Thomas looked up. "Possibly, but hazardous." Foley's eyes sharpened. "Compile everything we have. Depths, reports, currents, bearings. Work through the night." "Aye, sir." Thomas barely slept. He gathered fragments, old charts, recent notes, reports from local craft. Soundings that might be trustworthy, and others that had clearly been taken by men who counted optimism as a fathom. By dawn his eyes burned, and his fingers were black with ink, but he had assembled an assessment, uncertain, qualified, and therefore honest. For 3 more days the squadron drove east under press of canvas. The Mediterranean flashed hard blue under white heat. Sails strained. Men checked guns. Cutlasses were sharpened. Powder was inspected. Water was rationed. Officers spoke quietly. Midshipmen pretended not to count the hours. On the afternoon of August 1st, the masthead cried down, "Sail ho! Many sail on the eastern horizon. Enemy in sight." Flags climbed aboard Vanguard. The French fleet lay at anchor in Aboukir Bay. Thomas stood on Goliath's deck and saw, far ahead, the line of French ships under the Egyptian coast. 13 ships of the line, frigates anchored in order. The great flagship L'Orient among them, massive even at distance, 120 guns, and the pride of a republic that had lately cut off kings while building floating palaces. Captain Foley summoned his officers to the quarterdeck. "Gentlemen, we have found them." His gaze moved to Thomas. "Assessment." Thomas felt every eye turn. He cleared his throat. "The French are anchored in line, van to the north, rear southward, using shoal water as protection to landward. They will expect us to attack from seaward," Foley said. "Weakness? If the head of their line is not placed close to the shoal, a ship may pass between Guerrier and the shallows." A small movement went through the officers. Thomas continued, "But the channel would be narrow. We would need constant soundings. If the depth shoals unexpectedly, Goliath could ground under the French guns." Foley's expression did not alter, but something lit behind it. "Hazardous." "Yes, sir." "Impossible." "No, sir." Foley looked to his lieutenants. "Then we shall do what the French have reasonably assumed no sane opponent would attempt." No one objected. Objection would have required a different navy. The British fleet bore down in the late afternoon light. Goliath led. Behind her came Zealous, Orion, Theseus, Audacious, then Vanguard and the rest, including Bellerophon further back in line. Thomas could see her through his glass and felt something pull inside him. His ship, his berth, his friends. Soon she would pass into fire without him aboard. Foley stood near the rail. "They think themselves anchored beyond surprise," he said. Thomas looked at the French line. "Surprise is a kind of shoal, sir. It wrecks men who chart only what they expect." Foley glanced at him. "Keep talking like that, and someone will mistake you for a philosopher. Go forward." Thomas took station near the bow with the leadsman. The sun lowered. The water turned bronze and shadowed. The French line grew. Guerrier, the leading ship, loomed ahead. Her starboard battery faced seaward. Her port side, toward shore, was less ready. French sailors scrambled as they realized Goliath was not standing off to form a conventional line. The leadsman swung. "By the Mark 5!" again. "By the Mark 5!" Goliath pressed toward the gap. Thomas stared at the water. He watched color, ripple, current, the faint lift that might mark bottom rising beneath them. The channel lay between enemy hull and shoal, narrow enough that a timid captain would have called it impassable, and a dead captain might later prove him wrong. "By the deep 4." 4 fathoms. Goliath drew near 24 feet. The margin was a clerk's mercy. Foley called from aft, voice calm. "Mr. Oxenham." "Bottom?" "Depth holds, sir, but the channel narrows ahead." "Helm steady." The ship moved on. Thomas could see faces now on Guerrier, French sailors staring, an officer pointing. Confusion turning to alarm. The gap opened. Or seemed to. For a few heartbeats, Goliath existed between mathematics and disaster. Then came the shudder. A scrape ran through the hull, deep and ugly. Thomas gripped the rail. "We have touched, sir." The ship slowed by a breath. Only a breath. Momentum carried her onward. The sound passed aft beneath their feet. Then Goliath was through. Foley's voice cut like steel. "Hard a starboard! Run out the larboard guns!" The ship swung. Her port battery came to bear on Guerrier's unprepared side at murderous range. Fire! Goliath's broadside erupted. The ship vanished in her own smoke. The concussion hammered through Thomas's chest. At point-blank range, iron tore into Guerrier's port side, where she had expected protection, not attack. Guns overturned, men disappeared. Splinters flew in sheets. The French van, caught between disbelief and destruction, began to fail before the battle had fully begun. Behind them, Zealous followed through the gap. Then Orion, Theseus, Audacious. Each found the inner side of the French line and opened fire from where no French captain had wished to imagine British guns. To seaward, Nelson's vanguard and the following ships engaged the other side. The French van was trapped in crossfire. The Battle of the Nile began as sunset died. Night fell and the battle grew brighter. Gunfire flashed orange and white along both lines. Smoke rolled across the bay, lit from within by broadsides. Masts stood black against flame. The Egyptian shore lay dark beyond, indifferent, ancient, and very well accustomed to men ruining themselves under stars. Goliath engaged first guerrier, then conquérant, and the work became furious, close, disciplined. Thomas carried messages, checked soundings when ordered, helped with damage control, and twice assisted men hauling burning wreckage away from a hatch before sparks found powder or canvas. Around 9, word passed that Nelson had been wounded. For a few minutes the news moved like a chill through the British line. Then the guns continued. Nelson, wounded or not, the battle had already taken hold of every ship and would not politely pause for legend. Thomas looked often toward Bellerophon. He found her at last in the chaos, engaged with Lorient. The sight tightened his breath. Lorient was enormous, a 3-decker, 120 guns, Admiral Brueys's flagship. Bellerophon, brave and outmatched, stood near her like a bulldog worrying a bull. Broadside after broadside smashed between them. Bellerophon's masts and rigging suffered terribly. Her hull flickered in gunfire and smoke. "My God," Thomas whispered. No one heard. Near 10 o'clock, flames appeared aboard Lorient, small at first, then larger. Fire climbed canvas, ran through rigging, took hold with terrifying appetite. Men could be seen against the glow, frantic, tiny, doomed by scale. Other ships tried to distance themselves. Boats moved. Guns fell silent near her, as both sides understood what fire meant in a ship packed with powder. For nearly an hour, Lorient burned. She became less a ship than a furnace with masts. The bay glowed red. Smoke towered upward. Debris fell burning into the sea. Thomas stood on Goliath's quarterdeck, unable to look away. Bellerophon was alongside her, he said. A lieutenant near him replied, "She is hauled clear. Pray it was far enough." Then Lorient exploded. The sound struck the bay like the end of the world rehearsing. Light turned night to day. A column of fire rose, carrying timber, guns, men, spars, flame, canvas, iron, and fragments of a flagship into the sky. The blast wave hit Goliath moments later, slamming air into lungs and driving men against rail and deck. Burning wreckage rained across the water. A swell rolled outward from where Lorient had been. For a long moment, the battle stopped. British and French alike fell silent. Even guns seemed to understand that something greater than artillery had spoken. Then, slowly, the firing resumed. By morning, the French fleet was broken. Only 2 ships of the line and 2 frigates escaped. The rest were captured, burned, sunk, dismasted, or helpless. A Kirbai, which the evening before had held the fleet that carried Bonaparte's hopes, now held wreckage, prisoners, floating bodies, drifting spars, and British victory so complete it seemed almost indecent. Dawn came over smoke. Captain Foley summoned Thomas. His face was blackened with powder. His eyes were bright with fatigue and triumph. "Mr. Oxenham, sir, your navigation contributed materially to last night's success. Without confidence in that passage, we might not have attempted the movement that broke their van." Thomas stood straighter. "Thank you, sir, Captain. The decision was yours." "Correct. But decision requires ground beneath it, or water under the keel. You gave us reason to trust the latter." Foley's voice softened by a fraction. "I will mention you in my report to Admiral Nelson." Thomas did not know what to say. "Now," Foley continued, "I believe it is time you return to your own ship. Bellerophon took heavy punishment from Lorient. They will need every capable hand." Thomas's concern broke through at once. "Casualties, sir?" Foley's expression sobered. "Severe. Captain Cranstone wounded, many others. But she fought gallantly. The whole fleet saw it." By midday, Thomas was rowed across to Bellerophon. The closer he came, the worse she looked. Masts shot away. Rigging hanging in blackened ruin. Hull pierced and patched. Gunports ragged. Decks scrubbed but still stained. She looked less like a ship than a wounded beast that had refused to lie down. Commander Ballard was elsewhere now. Thomas's tired mind corrected itself. Lieutenant Morris met him at the entry port, face grey with exhaustion. "Mr. Oxenham, welcome back. How is Captain Cranstone?" "Alive, gravely wounded, knocked senseless when shot struck near him." "Surgeon hopes?" Thomas followed him through the ship. Bellerophon smelled of blood, burned powder, wet ash, hot metal, vinegar, and men who had worked too long in the ruins of their own survival. "And the others?" Thomas asked. "Milford, Farley?" Morris paused. "Milford took a splinter in the leg. He will recover." Thomas waited. "Farley was on the forecastle when we received a broadside from Lorient." Morris did not finish at once. He did not need to. Thomas stopped walking. "Farley, the pocket compass, the first bread in the berth, the warning about Milford, duty as a bucket." "Did he suffer?" "No," Morris said. "That was either mercy or fact." Thomas accepted it as both. "We lost 49 killed," Morris continued quietly, 148 wounded, nearly a third of our complement. Bellerophon held Lorient until others could come up. Thomas looked around at torn deck and blackened beams. Yes, she had held and paid. In the midshipman's berth, Milford sat propped against a sea chest, legs splintered, face drawn. His uniform was torn, one sleeve stained dark, but his eyes still possessed their sharpness. "There's our navigator," Milford said. "I hear you found water where the French assumed mud." Thomas sat beside him. "I'm sorry about Farley." Milford's face altered. The sharpness cracked. "They say it was instant." Thomas nodded. "Men say that when they have nothing better to give." "Yes." They sat in silence. The berth felt wrong. Too much space. Too many missing sounds. Milford looked away. Philip from Goliath brought word. "Foley is singing your praises to Nelson." "I did my duty." "As did we all," Milford said. He gestured around the berth. "But duty comes with a butcher's bill." Thomas looked at Farley's old place. "Yes." Over the next days, while the fleet secured prizes and began the long labor of repair, Thomas divided his time between restoration work aboard Bellerophon and visits to Captain Cranstone's cabin. Cranstone lay pale and weak, but alert. "Tell me again about Goliath's maneuver," he said. Thomas described the approach, the gap, the soundings, the scrape, the turn inside Guerrier, the crossfire. Cransdown closed his eyes, listening as if seeing the whole battle laid on a chart behind his lids. "A stroke of genius from Foley," he said. "Yes, sir." "And you had a hand in the channel." "I compiled what information we had." Cransdown opened his eyes. "Do not diminish usefulness, Mr. Oxenham. In battle, good information acted on swiftly may be worth more than courage badly aimed." Thomas said nothing. Cransdown's mouth curved faintly. "I have received a note from Nelson. He mentions you." "Me, sir?" Foley was emphatic. Nelson appreciates initiative and audacity properly ballasted by judgment. A week after the battle, Thomas was summoned to Vanguard. He crossed in a boat over water still littered with wreckage. Spars drifted, charred fragments knocked softly together. Here and there men worked among prizes, repairs, prisoners, and the afterbirth of victory. Vanguard bore scars, but far fewer than Bellerophon. Thomas was shown to the great cabin and waited, adjusting his coat. Aware that one sleeve was patched and one cuff still bore a powder stain no scrubbing had lifted. The door opened. Rear Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson entered. He was smaller than Thomas had expected. This surprised him, though he did not know why. Legend enlarges men in advance and leaves them to disappoint by inches. Nelson was thin, pale, his empty right sleeve pinned to his coat, his right eye covered. But the remaining eye held such force that the missing part seemed not absence, but concentration. He looked at Thomas as if the room had lost importance. "Mr. Oxenham." "Admiral." Thomas bowed. Nelson's voice was gentler than expected. "I am pleased to meet the young officer who helped Captain Foley find his way around the French line." "It is an honor, sir." "Foley speaks highly of you. Navigational ability, coolness under pressure, useful qualities. Sit." Thomas sat because Nelson had said it, though sitting in an admiral's cabin felt like presumption wearing breeches. Nelson leaned forward. "Tell me what you saw in the French formation." Thomas chose each word carefully. The French assumed the shoals protected their landward side. That was reasonable. But Guerrier appeared not close enough to the shallows to deny all passage. If water remained there, an attack from inside the van would surprise them and divide their attention. "And you believe there was water?" "I believe there might be enough, sir, with constant soundings." Nelson smiled. "Might be enough. That is the hinge on which battles turn." Thomas said. "Captain Foley took the risk." "Yes, but a captain needs men who bring him possibilities, not merely dangers." Nelson studied him. "You are James Oxenham's son." "Yes, sir." "Of HMS Lively. Fine officer, resourceful at Toulon. It appears the family habit continues." Thomas did not know whether to thank him for a compliment offered to blood, training, or accident. Nelson saved him by reaching for a small leather case. "A token." He placed it in Thomas's hands. Inside lay a brass telescope of excellent quality, compact, polished, beautifully made. "May it help you find further opportunities," Nelson said, "preferably before the enemy has fortified them." Thomas's throat tightened. "Thank you, Admiral. I shall treasure it." "Treasure use," Nelson said. "Objects are nothing if left in cases." Thomas returned to Bellerophon in something like a daze. The news spread before he had fully crossed the deck. Nelson had received him. Nelson had praised him. Nelson had given him a telescope. By supper, Clark had already proposed 3 embroidered versions of the event, each less plausible than the last. Morris declared that Thomas would now be intolerable. Milford, from his splintered confinement, examined the telescope and nodded. "Fine glass." "Yes. Do not let it go to your head." "The glass?" "The Admiral." Thomas smiled. Milford leaned back. "Fame is fleeting in the Navy. Today's hero is tomorrow's officer of the watch in rain." Thomas looked toward the battered deck above. "I know." Milford's face grew serious. "We shall remember this day all our lives." "Yes. For those of us who have lives left to remember it with." A month later, with Bellerophon sufficiently repaired for the voyage home, Thomas wrote to Greystone House. He described the Battle of the Nile carefully, not as a boy boasting, not as a newspaper cheering, as a witness trying to be honest without being cruel. He wrote of Goliath leading the attack, of the narrow channel inside Guerrier, of Foley's decision, of the sudden broadside into the unprotected side of the French van. He wrote of Bellerophon engaging Lorient, and of the terrible courage required to stand against a ship nearly twice her force. He wrote of the explosion, though no words could properly carry it. Then he paused, the pen hovered, he continued, "I have seen both the best and worst of what men can do in war. I have seen courage so steady it seemed almost ordinary, and ruin so complete that glory feels too small a word for what is left afterward. Farley is gone. You may remember him from my letters as the midshipman who first helped me aboard. He was a good friend to me, and I shall miss him. I find myself changed by these experiences in ways I do not yet understand. The boy who left Greystone House seems distant now, though I hope you will still recognize me when next we meet. I sometimes wonder whether the sea makes men larger or merely carves away the parts it does not need." He hesitated, then added a lighter line for Eliza and William. "Give my love to Eliza and my regards to William. Tell him I have seen metalwork enough in battle to make him wince, but also things that might suit his hand one day. Bellerophon against Lorient, perhaps, wrought in iron for the mantelpiece, though mother may prefer flowers. Your loving son, Thomas." He sealed the letter. Outside, the Egyptian coast glowed gold in the setting sun. The Battle of the Nile was already becoming legend. Nelson would be raised higher than any man could comfortably stand. Songs would be sung, medals struck, speeches made, dispatches copied and recopied. The French army in Egypt was now stranded, its fleet destroyed, Bonaparte's eastern dream left with sand under its feet, and no ships to carry it home. Thomas touched the brass telescope at his side. The unexpected approach. Foley had taken it. Nelson had prized it. The French had not imagined it. Perhaps that was the shape of advancement too, not always moving straight ahead, but finding the passage others believed impossible, testing the water, scraping bottom, and driving through before hesitation could become command. The sun dipped. Red and gold spread across the sea. A bell sounded. Another watch. Another duty. Thomas straightened his coat, took Nelson's telescope, and went up to the quarter-deck. The war had not ended. It had merely opened another horizon.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.